those new things that jump around.
Good morning. I know that because of the nature of things, especially during this week, this room will get a little more crowded as people sober up from last evening. But in the interest of time, we are going to get started. So let me begin by thanking all of you for being here with us as we move into a discussion of how education plays a role in this whole issue of environmental justice. And many of you are aware that several years ago, this brain trust was established for the sole purpose of getting people to focus on health, basically, and the intersection that exists between the environmental conditions and health. Now, that kind of discussion takes us to sort of a reactive mode, or to respond to something that exists or that has existed. Today, our focus is going to be a bit different in that we are beginning to focus on prevention, how we can really use those tools that are available to us through the education and the institutions that are put in place to help educate the public, and hopefully in such a way that we will prevent a lot of these things from occurring. Now, I want to offer an explanation. I want to apologize for this because, as you can imagine, this is going to be a very eventful year for those of us serving in the Congress. I'm going to be getting started here, and I'll be going in and out because at 11 o'clock I have another event focusing on voting that I have to open. And then at 12 o'clock, I have my third event focusing, now we may say, whatever we may say, I'm going to be talking to my fraternity that's been focusing on men and boys. However, they don't know it yet, but I'm going to be talking to them about the role that the quote-unquote Divine Nine needs to play as we go through this eventful year. Now, I see some of y'all may be a little nervous about that. Now, I don't have anything against alphas and kappas and sigmas. You know, I hang out with David Rivers, so you know I have nothing against alphas. And part of this is to let them know that Divine Nine needs to mean something. And so I'm going to be going, spend some time with them, and hopefully get them started and get back here with you in the interim. I'll be popping in and out. All of these things are near, so I won't be that far away. So let me thank Dr. Rivers for his continued leadership of this effort. He has been with us from day one, and many of you may have been tuning into these made-for-television productions that this Brain Trust continues to do every year. It is getting tremendous response from all over the country as a very good tool for getting this issue focused on properly. And today we have a panel that will further this discussion. Now, I'm familiar with everybody on this panel. I want to thank them for being here with us today. The first person you're going to hear from, I think we're going to go in order. I see David Rivers assigning seats. So I'm assuming he is assigned you all in the order that I have you all here before me. If so, then the first person you hear from is Dr. Glenda Glover. She's president of Tennessee State University, one of. It's a great university. I'm a product of a state university in another part of the South. But that she has given tremendous leadership. I've gotten to know her over the years, and this may be my third time this year being with us, with her in this kind of a capacity. She was with me in South Carolina back in August, and earlier this year we were together here in Washington. I think that was this year.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So good to see you again, Dr. Glover, and we look forward to hearing from you. Now, Dr. Britt Rios Ellis from California. That's Southern California.
Southern, well, no, now it's Middle California.
That's right, yeah, you've kind of moved.
I went a little north.
Well,
Yeah.
you're becoming a northerner. Thank you so much. You know, I'm a little bit partial to Southerners, but that's all right. Thank you so much for being here with us. She's the founding dean of the College of Health Sciences and Human Services at California State University in Monterey. I spent some time with your retiring congressman yesterday, and the day before I spent some time with the person I hope will be your next congressman.
I think you will.
So, good. Dr. Milton Bluehouse Jr., who is the Tribal Consultation Resource, you're the founder of this group. Now, Dr. Bluehouse has been with us for some time. When we had our environmental, I call it a sort of a tour. In fact, I just left an event with Barbara Lee, who hosted us in Oakland, California, around the time I first met this gentleman. I thank him so much for the work he's doing in this area. We did not leave any communities of need out. We focus on Native American homelands. I'd rather call it that than call it reservations. I have a hard time getting that word off my tongue. So the Native American homelands, we went into those communities as well to look at how we ought to be focusing our attention on them. And then Ms. Karen Dale is market president at AmeriHealth. AmeriHealth here in the District of Columbia. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And then, of course, Dr. Marvella Ford. Dr. Ford is professor of the Department of Public Health Services and associate director of the Cancer Disparities at the Hollins Cancer Center. And she's sort of my neighbor, because the Hollins Cancer Center is next door to the JMG Clyburn Research Center at the Medical University of South Carolina. So neighbor, thank you so much for being here with us today as well. Each panel will talk for 15 minutes or less. If you can get your point across in less than 15 minutes, you don't need to filibuster. But, as I'm doing, leave the filibustering up to the politicians. So, but we don't want you to go more than 15 minutes. And then, after each one of them has presented, then we're going to open up to you. We want you to ask piercing questions. We want to leave here with a focus on what we can do about these issues. Let me close with this. One of the problems I have in public life is that for some strange reason we come to panels like this, people want to talk about the problem without ever offering any kind of solution. You know, these are some people that know how bad things are. Most of us know how bad things are. All you got to do is turn on your television or pick up a newspaper, and you can find out pretty much how bad things are. It seems to me that if we spend half of the energy trying to create some solutions that we spend on talking about the problems, we can make some progress. We can make some progress. So we want to focus on some solutions. My dad, who used to teach us in very fundamental ways, he would always say that you should lead by precept and example. It's one thing to tell us what the problem is. It's something else for you to show us how to solve it. He used to conclude a lot of his discussions with, it's always better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And so we didn't come here today to curse the darkness. We want to spend some time lighting some candles so we can shed some light on these problems and a light on a pathway forward. Thank you so much, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Glover for her 15 minutes of fame.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Congressman Clyburn. Thank you, Dr. Rivers, for my good friend, Dr. Rivers, for this invitation, and to both of you for having the foresight to host such a conference like this. It's much needed forum, and we express our appreciation to you also, Congressman Clyburn, the leader who's fought so hard for equality, this equal access to all sectors of our society. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here to participate in this discussion as we talk about education and how it relates to environmental justice and as well as the impact on health issues. There's no better timing to raise these concerns than now. We're in the midst of the fight of our economic lives, the fight of our social lives, the fight of our political lives, the fight of our educational lives. So the challenges, the issues that we have, the economic inequities that exist, the environmental injustice, we're still fighting educational challenges that are in front of us. This is a time of shamelessness. This is in-your-face cruelty that the people are running for office. Just elect me, and I'll take your health care. Elect me, and I'll take your voting rights. Elect me, and I'll take you back where you came from. Elect me, I'd even resegregate your public schools. So of course there's a problem of disparity, of health disparity as it relates to education. The best example is the water situation in Flint, Michigan. The strong relationship between education and health care has been well documented. The relationship between education and poverty, employment, health has been tested throughout the literature. The living conditions, environmental justice, people living where air quality is bad, health quality is poor. The unique relationship between environmental justice, environmental protection, economic development, education, and human health. When we look at the social determinants that play a role in the communities where disproportionate health problems exist, education is a major factor. Family education is one of the most, early education is one of the most important things we can do to help children learn about the effects of lead. So we know the problem started in Flint with the lead when they changed the water that was treated in Detroit to water from the Flint River. The river water was high in salt that was corroded the plumbing and allowed the lead to leak into the water. Lead in our drinking water supply, lead, clearly an educational issue, an environmental justice issue, even a poverty issue. As a result, the children, the young children, and unborn babies were the most vulnerable population, the defenseless to this position of lead. So destroying cells and slowing down growth, brain tissues, the poison. So these effects cannot be reversed. There is no safe level of lead. So if Flint had had some early education, some programs that will provide some kind of enhanced treatment, some kind of enhanced classroom or transportation to the families, to the hospitals, to the doctors, it could have been helped. You know, if they expanded some kind of classroom program for preschool children, just open students for help students in the worst affected areas and take some needed actions. So somebody in Flint said, we just didn't know. Well, I'm here to tell you, we had a duty to know, a responsibility to educate. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. So we can't continue to operate like this. There are those who want to give pity to billionaires and inflict more pain on the poor. Never in our history have we spent so much money to resist equality. That's why we need forums like this. That's why we need these brain trusts. Because 4 more years of education reduces the risk of heart disease by 3%. 4 more years of education reduces the risk of diabetes by 2%. Additional 4 years of education lowers the probability of poor health by 6 percentage points. And 4 more years of schooling reduces lost days from work for sickness by 3 days each year. So 4 more years of education can report some positive health behaviors. You're less likely to smoke. You're less likely to drink, a lot less. You're less likely to be obese. You're less likely to use illegal drugs. So now we know all the health challenges alone, behaviors alone, can't be explained by disparities just because of the disparities in and of themselves. But just the value of education, we can show it relates to the health and environmental issues. Why is this important? This is important because we have to know where we are at this point in time. 27% of African Americans live in poverty. 12 million children, red, yellow, black, and white, are in poverty. 14% of African Americans are unemployed. We need forums like this to address these issues. And as president of Tennessee State University, one of the leading universities in this country, which I believe is the best university in the country, we have students who enrolled, who come from these statistics, who come from these families, from this area, these areas. That's why we're here. So if we know that we have the uninsured problem, we know we have the incarceration problem, too much violence that exists. 1 million people have been killed since Dr. King was assassinated almost 50 years ago. 300,000 black folk have been killed since 1979, and 11,000 African Americans killed each other in 2014. We've got work to do. We have to address these issues of disparity, these issues. And before I go any further, I have to announce that we must vote. We can't talk about these issues and they're going nowhere if we don't vote. This is the most critical election since the Nixon-Kennedy election. So we must vote. And we can't solve these issues if we stay home on November 8th. So here we are, 22 million African Americans eligible to vote, and yet 8 million did not vote. 50% of Christians are not even registered to vote. That is an embarrassment to God. That's why we gather here this morning. 53 days left until Election Day, and across this nation there are tough times. Corporations are treated like people, and people are treated like things. I commend this conference. I commend Dr. Rivers. I commend Congressman Clyburn for your stance, Congressman Clyburn. Sometimes unpopular, but I commend our legislators who consistently stand up for democracy. And then I applaud our president of these United States. Let's examine where we are with this president who's so often criticized. Richard Brent wrote an article recently about where we are right now in America. Corporate profits are at record highs. The country's adding hundreds of thousands of jobs each month. Unemployment is below 6%. The gross national product is the best for developed countries. The dollar is at its strongest level in years. The stock market is at record highs. There is no inflation. Interest rates are low as they've been in 30 years. Deficit is declining. And the wealthy are still making money, astonishing amounts of money. America is leading the world, and we are a great nation. America is great. So I commend the president for digging us out and bringing us back. Somebody in another country said, when y'all are done with America, with Obama in America, please send him to us. So as I close, let me remind you, as a woman, as a female leader, we have to be careful. And as we are having a good time and dealing our cards and having fun, don't get trumped. Thank you very much. We have work to do.
Okay, I have to tell you that my students are so much smarter than me, so they told me that I needed to bring it a little bit up in terms of my technology. So I'm using something called a Prezi. The young people are going, we already know what this is no, but for me, almost 54, this was a little bit of a challenge, so he's helping me out. There we go. And what I want you to do is to divide your attention. Great, perfect. To divide your attention between me and the images. Oh, wait, oops, I did something wrong. Of course. The images I'm going to show you, because I looked for things that really describe what our climate is from an educational standpoint. And when I look at health and educational disparities, and we know that education is the foremost predictor of health, we have some issues. And I think one of the problems is, and I won't blame people from a long time ago, but with No Child Left Behind, we left a lot of people behind. We created one way of learning and one way of testing aptitude. We created academic indices that are much too difficult for people to surmount. And we created a system that does not have access. We raised tuition. We did all kinds of things to be able to omit certain individuals from getting into our educational system, and we're suffering from it right now. I'm in a movement in California. We don't have enough physicians who speak Spanish. We don't have enough physicians who speak the indigenous languages of Latin America, predominantly Mexico, where so many of our folks are coming from to pick our fruit and vegetables. I come from a place that is a former military base and is converted into a university. We produce 50% of the nation's fruits and vegetables and about 70% of the nation's lettuce. It's called the lettuce curtain. Last year we had to leave 2,800 acres of food on the ground and just let it rot because we didn't have the folks to cultivate it. So when we're looking at now, we're importing physicians. We're going to be importing 30 physicians from Mexico on a 3-year basis to come in. Why? Because our educational systems have failed to produce the diversity in physicians that we need. And that has a direct impact on our health. So I really think, and I titled my talk, Creating Different Paths to Learning Honors Diversity. People get there in very, very different ways. And just take our president, for example. It wasn't a straight line. It rarely is a straight line. We can plot the best path, but usually it's not. So if we're going to get to greatness, and I think that's what our country is about, we better be able to navigate diverse paths. So now this is going to move, I think. There it goes. So what I really see when I look at our educational system is we need an increased cultural humility within our systems. We need for embracing of what inclusive excellence really needs. We need to move away from competence to humility. I get very, very worried when people go to a training and get a certificate that tells them they're culturally competent. And although I love cultural competence, there's a lot of people with those certificates that aren't very competent, right? So we need to move into what I think is cultural humility, which requires deference to another's knowledge as opposed to proving what you know. And coming away from No Child Left Behind, we're in a system where we prove what we know, and we prove what we know through aptitude tests. Humility requires that respect be demonstrated from both individuals and systems, and I would agree so much with the President right here saying that we don't have a respectful election right now, and we're seeing that again and again. We must ask ourselves as educators within systems, how do we in our institutional systems demonstrate the humility necessary to respond to diverse situations with respect and with the intention of true inclusion? Oops. This is not moving like my students told me it would. Sorry about this. So I looked, and one of the things when I was asked to talk about environmental justice, we know that there are 3 things that aren't sustainable. Fear isn't sustainable. Discrimination isn't sustainable. And I saw examples of our students just knowing so much more than what is displayed right now on our nightly television. So we often find difficulty acknowledging racism, sexism, and homophobia and other forms of discrimination in our current educational system. We try to intellectualize it. We try to say, oh, that was your experience. I have a different perception. But I keep on advising my faculty and my students that when you've been discriminated against or when you felt that you don't belong in a system, it doesn't always hit you right at the head. It hits you between the heart and the gut. And we need to get there, and I think cultural humility helps us get there. We intellectualize the isms by creating a dialogue about perceptions and intentions, and in that way we protect what's been deemed as white fragility, and we protect it very well. We fail to understand why it's important to study and honor ethnic, sexual, racial identities and histories, and there's no better example than Arizona right now, where we have not only narcotraficantes, we have librotraficantes, right? We have folks that are taking around books in vans that are illegal, like Shakespeare's The Tempest. We fail to tie adversity into the resilience theory and how it shapes success, but what we know from Duckworth is that when people have to overcome obstacles, they become resilient and they also become successful. We do not represent our students through our faculty, and that is something that as a dean I'm really trying to change. Our students should be able to see themselves in our faculty, and they don't. We do not incorporate cultural capital, and we don't value culture, and we don't value what students bring to our educational system and how that can be integrated into the way that we do business. We don't blend cultural capital with what we're learning about resilience to optimize the potential for student success. And this is these slides were so good. So Johns Hopkins University, where only 5 professors look like you. Again, another example of what we see. Here's another. These are white folks saying exactly the same thing. Our students are very, very smart, and they see the problem. They're saying, we demand that UPS, University of Puget Sound, build a cultural center in the space where Warner Jim currently resides. We've privatized our systems. And they asked for diversity, and they asked for prospective students who may identify with a marginalized community. So intersections of diversity and sustainability. One question a student asked was, where are your ancestors from? One planet, one people. And again, reminding ourselves that racism is something that is learned. It's not something that we're born with. Diversity in nature and humanity are inextricably linked, and by honoring context and diverting resources to places of need, we learn diverse approaches and we optimize environmental conditions to promote health, education, and wellness. And I'm always reminded, I work with a Mayan community in a remote part of Mexico, and they're just starting to see diabetes. And I asked them, which there's not even a word for diabetes in Mayan at all. And I asked them, so how do you know whether someone has diabetes? And they said, we urinate within about a foot of an anthill. And if the ants come, depending on how many ants come to that urine, then we know someone has diabetes. I thought, oh my God, that's brilliant, right? That's absolutely brilliant, right? Without the resources, people know, but we've forgotten how to take care of nature, and we've forgotten how to link that to our health. So we really need to look at the Millennium Development Goals for sustainability. We need to focus on place-based solutions, and as those advocated by the 10-20-30 bill, which you didn't tell me to talk about, but it could be the most remarkable transformation and reduction of poverty that we see, so that we can improve lives both locally and globally. And this is another one that these students know, America KKK, right? And I think what a good example of what we're dealing with in our election year. Again, our students know, and we need to learn from them. And if we were any other business, we would have gotten this right away. So I want folks to look at how our teaching contributes to the Sustainable Development Goals, because that's very important. Because it's a very small planet, very, very small, and we are more and more linked. And I think this one also says it, no más hate. I am America, no more hate. So we're either going to build a world on education where we're going to keep seeing these improvements that we've made over 4 years, or we're going to build a nation on hate. I'm banking for education. So I want to just give a plug for where I am. It's the California State University. We educate 500,000 students a year. 1 of every 10 employees in California is a CSU grad. And I'm really glad, because when I started my career, I chose between Johns Hopkins and Cal State University at a time of economic crisis. And people said, what in the hell are you doing? You're nuts. And I said, no, I want to go where there's a diverse student population. I want to go where I'm going to be able to make a difference. And I believe that I have been able to do that. The average time to degree is 4.7 years. Although it's a discretionary item on the state's budget, it's a discretionary item. For every $1 that's invested, $5.43 comes back. We create more than $17 billion in expenditures in terms of raising the economy. We award half of the state's bachelor's degrees. Half of our current students are students of color. Half of our undergraduate degrees are awarded to African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans who are underrepresented. And 18 of the 23 CSUs are Hispanic serving institutions. But one of the reasons I got into administration is that we need to make sure. And one thing I want to say before I flip is $732 million in economic impact, and the CSU through voluntary hours. And this is our freshman class this year. And you can see we're very, very diverse. And I think we need to remind ourselves that no one's dreams are illegal. And these are just some paths to success of our students. And I'm just going to give you a few, and I'm going to try to flip through them. These are obviously stock photography, but I have hundreds of examples like this. This student was raised by a single mother, extensive gang involvement, had in and out at juvie. And again, the incarceration of youth is what we need to look at as well, because we're putting them in jail, not schools. High school dropout. While he was incarcerated, he met a mentor. He excelled in a community college nursing program. He transferred to a CSU 4-year degree. He became an ER nurse, and he's now recognized for his work. He runs an ER in one of the toughest parts of LA, and he's amazing. I have others. This student, well, it's not really him, but that's okay. Again, raised by a single mom, extensive gang involvement, got involved with drugs, was incarcerated as an adult for 3 years. He entered a community college, then came to the CSU. He had a 4-point GPA. He's now is a graduate leader within our MSW program, and he's working as a full-time drug and alcohol counselor on a full-time scholarship. Another woman that I worked with, again, raised by a single mom in a high-crime environment, Compton, excelled in academic environment despite obstacles, finished her bachelor's degree, got her master's of public health, was selected for an NIMHD funded program, and once again excelled as a scholar, applied for medical school, was accepted to Howard, and then she got pregnant, and we all went, oh. But guess what? Her family's really supportive, and her mom said, I've got your back. And so between her mother and her, she's now 3rd year Howard student in medicine, excelling and doing very, very well. Yeah. She's out of town, or she would be with me right now. Another student, same thing. She's got same kind of thing. Her dad was incarcerated for a crime he didn't commit. Her brother was incarcerated for something he did do. She helped her mom raise 5 children. She entered community college, then a CSU. Then she got her master's of public health. Then she got her PhD. Now she's a lawyer, and she works for the federal government and is happily married with a family of 2. So, again, these are diverse paths, and we have to honor these paths, and we have to change the way we go about doing education. The moral of the story is we need mechanisms of outreach, retention, and programs to undergird student and faculty success. Programs must be accessible, and we need to honor student cultural capital and linguistic capital in these programs. We need to create equity in all of these programs, and we must be historically black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, ANAPCs, and tribal institutions, not by demography, but by intention. And we need to prove to the government when we get these dollars that we are intending to serve these populations. We need to build communities among students. We need a collaborative approach that honors people's support systems. We must teach economically challenged families that studying is working, because for a lot of families, they have never had that opportunity. It's never been witnessed in their experience. And we are beginning to ask a CSU-wide question: what would it be like if we really loved our students? What would we do differently? And one thing I think is that we would trust that they have the ability to succeed, and I think we do. And I want to go back to Freeman Hrabowski, who's just my absolute idol. And I tell students all the time, SMART simply means that you're there and you're ready to learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that informative presentation. My name is Milton Bluehouse Jr. And I guess a Juris Doctorate is a doctor of some type. That's what I have. I wanted to thank Congressman Clyburn. I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus and the organization. I want to thank Dr. Rivers, and I also want to thank Melinda Downing for this tremendous opportunity to be here over the last several years. I've learned so much, and I've taken so much of the information I've gained here back into my small community. As I was preparing for today's presentation, I kept thinking about the introduction to the late Vine Deloria's book, Custer Died for Your Sins, and I continually reference that because it's so enlightening in terms of understanding the cultural divides that our tribal and non-tribal communities have as it pertains to the environment. In the introduction, the late Dr. Vine Deloria mentions getting on an elevator in, I think it is in Ohio, a large city in Ohio, Cincinnati. And he gets on this elevator, and as he goes up to his hotel room, another gentleman joins him, a non-Native American white person. The conversation starts up with this gentleman talking to Dr. Vine Deloria, essentially stating, what would have Native Americans done with the environment anyways? And this conversation is about the environment, the ideology about the environment as a resource to exploit and to develop. Dr. Vine Deloria, very witty, sits back a moment and thinks about it. And he responds, you're absolutely right, sir. We would have never thought to make the Cuyahoga River flammable, right? I marvel at that conversation because it does highlight how we view the environment from multiple frames of view. When I think about social determinants of health as it relates to environmental justice, I know that the environment is only one element to that social determinant, and the subsets of that environment, the specific media, water, air, land, groundwater, surface water, etc., all create unique conversations related to how health in tribal and non-tribal communities are going to be impacted, such as in Flint, Michigan, or right now currently in South Dakota with the protests, the protectors who are opposing the North Dakota access pipeline. And so when we think about the interconnectivity of environmental contaminants within our multiple communities, there's something that I reflect back on, again, is what education has done for our communities. While it's also been very empowering and liberating how we become educated and how we use that education within our multiple communities may prove beneficial, may protect the environment. However, when we look at Indian education, we go back in time with the Indian Civilization Act of 1819, where the intention was to essentially later, as Captain Pratt in 1892 mentioned at Carlisle Indian School, to kill the Indian and save the man. And so when you think about Indian education from 1819, even up until today, the development of curriculum, the application of the curriculum, the intention of the curriculum, and what we hope students become after they become sufficiently educated. we oftentimes have to think about what we're educating Indian people for, or our tribal communities or non-tribal communities for. At that time throughout history, it was about essentially civilizing Indian people, learning how to read, learning how to do math, doing away with cultural and traditional knowledge and life ways. And so in a sense that you would become what America was at different points in time of history. So from 1819 and the Removal Act in 1830, the insistence of placing Indian children in boarding schools, the Carlisle Indian School in the mid-1870s, and then eventually the statement in 1892 by Captain Pratt to kill the Indian and save the man, and then eventually a realization by 1928 that the educational efforts and the civilizing efforts of the federal government were really kind of detrimental. They were disastrous, in a sense, maybe even murderous. The birth rates, the infant mortality rates, the life expectancy rates were realized. An important realization occurred by 1928, 1931, and 2 and 3, that if the policies of the American government, if the educational direction that the federal government was pursuing within tribal communities were pursued, that eventually, over time, there literally would be no more Native Americans. When you think about detrimental policies such as the Allotment Act, which essentially allotted surplus Indian reservation lands from the 1870s up until about 1928, we had lost 3/4 of tribal land bases. And when you think about the time frame in which land was lost and the conditions of Native peoples on Indian reservations and the deplorable services that the federal government was providing for daily sustenance for tribal communities, you realize that the correlation between land and our tribal communities was one where in modern day comparisons, you would essentially take away about 85 to 90% of grocery stores in America today. Given that comparison, you can't help but wonder what the impacts were like for our tribal communities. We were dying. That's what the impacts were. The land was a place where we got our medicine, where we got our food, where we practiced our cultural and religious ceremonies. And so with the loss of land, you can see that eventually we will die out. So by 1934, Congress passes the Indian Reorganization Act with a specific emphasis on Indian education, a specific emphasis on looking at how culture can supplement education. Everything is fine and dandy, but then again later in American history, particularly with American Indian policy development, we see the change in the focus of Indian education with the Determinant Act from 1953 up until about 1968, in which federal funding for education was slashed. 109 tribes were terminated during this policy, and for those tribes who were not terminated, there was a substantial decrease in federal funding for education from 8 to 12. However, and again, seeing the view of America from within Indian reservations outward, by the 1950s up until about 1968, there was something very magnificent happening in America with the civil rights movement. And the really interesting thing about my life and the lives of many of us on Indian reservations is that we're not sort of isolated or secluded on tribal lands. We look outwards for popular movements. We look outwards for critical observations. And likewise, tribal communities in that time frame began to question some things. Why are the conditions on Indian reservations, why are they such? Why has the federal government violated Indian treaties? What are results of those violations? And in a sense then, tribal communities in this dynamic time began to protest the social, economic, and environmental injustices within tribal communities. The impact of Indian education from the beginning of this country up until today has been quite interesting in the sense that while on the one hand we hope to create educated tribal people within tribal communities who can read and do math, critically assess their social, economic, environmental realities, the curriculum itself is quite interesting. For a period from about 1970, perhaps even up until about the mid-1990s, there was a great big push within tribal communities to use educated Native peoples to exploit natural resources within tribal lands. And this is where we begin to examine uranium mining within the Navajo Nation and within a number of Pueblo communities in New Mexico. We begin to examine the development of coal within other tribal communities. We begin to look at the use of water resources to slurry coal. Right? All of this under the auspices that tribal communities should be economically developed and that tribal communities should join the 21st century. However, time has given us the privilege of looking back at the impacts that educated Native peoples and their supporters have created for tribal communities. Contaminated waters, open thousands, literally thousands of open uranium mines that still need to be reclaimed. We also look at the use of precious resources like water and the Navajo aquifer in northern Arizona to slurry millions and millions and hundreds of millions of pounds of coal over the course of about 30 years. And we have to sit back and wonder, what is the impact of education in tribal communities if we don't educate in a way that will create an awareness to respect Mother Earth, to respect the land, to respect the water, and to respect one another? Throughout my research for today's presentation, I kept coming back to this conversation in the research. Why isn't Indian education effective, given what we know about what we've been through over the course of 150 years? No Child Left Behind Act, right? The studies in tribal communities. The hope was that perhaps Indian kids would become more proficient in the sciences and in math and in reading and in English, but for a certain subset of students within the No Child Left Behind Act, there had been zero improvement over the course of several years. Why? Right? And this goes back to the conversation on social determinants of health. All of those things that impact our health. Jobs, safe homes, clean drinking water, having food on your table, right? When we look at Indian education within the context of the social determinants of health, we have to look at the poverty as well. Bone grinding poverty. I came from a community yesterday I flew out of I left the community to fly out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, my community, where 96% of the Native American men are unemployed. 73% of Native American women are unemployed. It is a pretty tough place to live, for sure. And so, one conversation that I'd come across, not only in talking with people back home, but in the research that I conducted, was, why aren't Indian kids doing better with the educational advancements and this very large presence of the federal government in Indian education? One kid summarized it perfectly. He said, why should I get a degree? There's no jobs here. What am I going to do? Right? Look at my family. Look at my father. He then went on to a big old conversation of alcoholism and substance abuse and domestic violence. And he said, you know what? 10 years from now, I'll probably be right here at this basketball court playing basketball, right? And so when we think about the social determinants of health and education and the environment, we not only have to look at the economy within tribal communities, but also in multiple communities. We have to look at the intention of what education is. We have to understand how to address domestic violence and substance abuse. It's almost this systemic reevaluation of where we come from, questioning what our intention is for education. I mean, how can we have kids going to college when their home is, you know, really tough place to grow up in? And so, one thing that I really appreciate Congressman Clyburn mentioning today is that, what are the solutions then? How do we begin to fix these problems? Well, becoming aware that the impacts in one community are also the impacts in another community. Becoming empowered, how do you begin to change these communities? And so for the last 7 years, not only have I provided training for federal and state communities, or state governments, I've also provided training for tribal communities. And I look back on it and I think, wow, did I really train 7,147 people over the course of 7 years? And I sat back and I began to wonder, where did that come from? Che Guevara, in one of his books, he wrote about the Foucault theory, placing critically and intellectually courageous individuals within economically and politically depressed communities. And through Paulo Freire's conversation on a pedagogy of the oppressed, while we may not have the technical education, while we might not have the ability to read or learn, we do have the ability to communicate, to talk, and to ask questions. Why are we living in poverty? How did you feel when there was domestic violence occurring? What do you think you can do to stop those things? Then you begin to create this critical awareness within a community that faces educational challenges. The other part of this educational conversation is really interesting is how does culture, how does language impact a person's education? In that sense then, what is education? From whose standards? Western standards? What about indigenous or your community's educational standards? That's when we begin to think about, well, what is the importance of indigenous language? What's the importance of our cultural language? What's the importance of our historical language in creating critical awareness in our communities? So then I think back now, and I apologize for taking too long. I think back now on my grandfather, Sam Bluehouse, who was an herbalist. He always used to say, you should pay attention to what the elders are saying. You should pay attention to what the weather is saying. You should pay attention to what the cultural and religious teachings are telling you, because that is also education, he said. When we looked at the research on Indian education, something quite phenomenal began to happen. What I started to see was that where education focused on culture, where education focused on language, where education focused on the interaction of community members, the traditional and cultural relationships to one another, test scores seemed to be improving. Kids felt a little bit more empowered, a sense of identity and a sense of purpose for why they're becoming educated. And these were schools like the Red Cloud High School in Pine Ridge. These were schools like the Navajo Community College in Sayuli, Arizona. And so we began to have to reevaluate what the purpose of education is, how we're educating our communities, and how we can strengthen our own communities. You know, the pedagogy of the oppressed, how do we begin to create critical communities? On ending, I want to say that I have received a very important gift from participating in the Braintrust and from talking with Dr. Rivers and participating in multiple meetings with Melinda Downing. And it's this small little tiny graph here. And I apologize, I don't have the technical proficiency here. I'm doing the late Tim Russert's chalkboard thing here. This is a circle divided into 4 sections, okay? If you can take a quick look at it, that's kind of how it looks. It's like a bullseye. That circle is divided into 4 sections, and each of those sections will say something like this. One section is social justice. Another section is environmental justice. Another section is economic justice. And then another section is cultural justice. The more that I've talked to people who've participated in Braintrust, whether we're standing out these doors or whether we're having conversations at dinner or in passing, I've been putting together pieces of things that look very similar among all of our communities. And I think it's these 4 things. So when it pertains to education, how are we educating our children and our communities to be more cognizant, to be more aware of social justice issues in our communities? What is our curriculum telling us about supporting and pursuing environmental justice? What are our schools teaching about economic justice? What is the purpose of learning about cultural justice? And so when I think about the application of that graph, social determinants of health, environmental justice within tribal communities, each of those 4 sections become quite important on how we develop our communities, whether for environmental benefits, whether or not we're going to employ people in the communities that I just came from, and how we're going to employ them, what type of jobs we're going to have. And so when I think about education as one of the elements for the social determinants of health within this overarching conversation on environmental justice, it becomes quite important what we're doing here. How are you going to use this information when you go back to your communities? It's really up to you. How I'm using it is really to create networks, to create an understanding, critical awareness. So I wanted to leave you on something quite humorous. Before I came out here today, I was with my mother. She's 80 years old. And I was also with my nephew. He is 6 years old. We were driving in Gallup, New Mexico, a Navajo Reservation border town. And over the course of about several weeks now, yeah, he's about 7 years old, I've been telling him, you know, this is how you read really big words. You got to stop and slow down and sound it out. And we're doing this phonetic stuff, right? Trying to understand how to say big words. And he'd get frustrated, and night after night we'd sit at the kitchen table. And he says, you know, Uncle, I can't read good, he says. Yeah, you can read good, just slow it down a little bit. So we then sound out really long, big words, right? School bus, for example. Well, anyways, we were in Gallup the other day, and my mom has bad eyesight, right? So she takes her glasses off and driving, and we're looking for a particular street in town. She puts her glasses on, and she can't quite see the sign. And she says out loud, I cannot read what that sign says. My nephew pops up from the back seat and says, sound it out, Grandma, sound it out. So on ending, I want to thank Congressman Clyburn and Dr. Rivers and Melinda Downing and all of you again for the opportunity to participate here, but more importantly, to learn things that are going to be beneficial for my community and all of our communities. So, thank you.
So some of you who are already standing are going to mess up my exercise. What I know about human beings is that our brains work better when we are engaged and moving, right? So you've been sitting for about an hour, so we're going to do a little exercise. So I want you to stand if you are a high school graduate.
Oh, man. I'm going to stand.
Remain standing if you are a college graduate. Okay? Remain standing if you are over 25 years old. Okay, I chose that number carefully. Okay, so have a seat. So here's my premise. If you are 25 years old and reasonably educated, I'm going to assume that the colleges and high schools and such that you went to provided you with an education that's taken you far enough. Along the way, you should have gathered some information about health, right, and well-being, what to do to be healthy, and know your numbers. I provide this framework for what I do, one portion of what the company I work for that's deeply rooted in health equity, very focused on building community health and wellness, which is to make sure that we achieve a level of health literacy that we can apply in our daily lives to be healthy as possible, right? So here's my question for you. Raise your hand. And I'm going to, just because I'm trying to get you to move more, raise both hands, not just one. That way you get some blood flowing. Raise both hands if you know your total cholesterol level. Nice. Oh, I like this group. Okay. All right, so I'm going to pick someone who raised their hand to explain to the rest of the audience what is total cholesterol. You look like you want to answer. Stand and project. Stand and project.
It's the combination of your LDL and HDL.
Oh, sookie. All right, okay. And it should be, did you all hear that? Okay, so what is LDL?
LDL is, and I always get these confused, LDL is the good one.
No.
No, it's
No.
the bad one. It needs to be, the L means it should be the lowest, and the H is the helper cholesterol.
The healthy,
It's
right.
healthy. healthy lifestyle.
Outstanding, outstanding. Just one more thing.
Yes.
Can you tell us how you learned this information?
By regularly seeing my doctor and having regular blood work done to tell me what those numbers were and monitoring it.
All right. So this is a perfect example of what we need happening so much in communities of color, right? We need to have a way that people easily underlined, flashing at you, easily understand information. It's wonderful that you have a relationship for life with a physician. It can be a physician, a nurse practitioner, but someone who's your primary health provider, so that over time they get to know you, you get to know them. It's a trusting relationship, and you can focus on all those things that help you to stay healthy. What happens in our communities of color very often? Is that happening? No, right? And so then the rest of the equation falls apart. And so that is the challenge. And what I want to talk with you for my 15 minutes is about some of the solutions that AmeriHealth is using and how they're working. One of the problems we have in healthcare is that we don't market so well, right? Other industries, this morning they had the thing flashing about the iPhone 7. You know, people lined up already. What did they do well so that people are lined up before the store even opens? Market, market, market. But in healthcare, we assume that it's so sexy that people are going to jump all over it because we talk in these really boring terms and we tell people what you should do, right? We've got to remove a lot of that from our vocabulary because it simply doesn't work. And it particularly doesn't work when I have a low resource environment in which I live, when I have a million other priorities that are pressing on me all the time, right? All these stressors. Can I pay my rent? Can I pay my light bill? You know, taking care of my children, what's going on in the neighborhood. Health does not end up ranking at the top, much less if you tell me about these things in such a drab, kind of boring way, right? And you make it that I have to run through a lot of hoops to get to the point of even getting this information. So I have to call for the appointment. Once they hear I have Medicaid, it might take longer for me to get an appointment. The appointments are only during the hours that I work or have to be home to take care of the kids. So now we've made all these problems and challenges, and what we really need to do is to turn this around in a way that offers solutions. So let me tell you a couple of the ways that we are doing that. So the first way we're doing that is let's go to where our members are. So we're a managed care organization. We serve about 100,000 district residents, and many of them, about 51% of our members, are living in very challenged environments. So putting them through the hoops will not help them to have the best opportunity to be healthy. So, for example, take Ms. Jones, who has been diagnosed with diabetes, and in being diagnosed with diabetes, she doesn't have a good understanding of her blood glucose level, the life changes, and it's life changes, right? It's life changing when you get a diagnosis of a chronic illness that she has to do in order to be healthy. You can be healthy and have the diagnosis of diabetes. You can be healthy and have the diagnosis of hypertension, but you need some help. You need to understand, and it's not a matter of whether you're smart or not, it's about that information being put into context. So she's going along, she got the diagnosis, she got very quick instructions, here's what you need to do, and it didn't work. So now she's been hospitalized, right, because her blood glucose level was through the roof, and she had to her family called 911, so now she's in the hospital. So she gets stabilized. What do you usually get when you're being discharged from the hospital? Right, and it's usually what, one page? Like a piece of paper. And it's usually used that it was triplicate, but I now know that many hospitals can just print the page for you, right? And you get a bill, right? And so things are checked off, and you're supposed to take that and figure it out and follow up. How often do you think that works? Not so much. If I didn't get it the first time at the doctor's office in the wonderful 7 minutes or so, right? and I didn't get it at the hospital, I'm likely to get readmitted. So in looking at our data, we definitely saw that phenomena occurring over and over again. And so what we decided to do was to have someone go to the hospital to be more helpful. And we thought long and hard about who might be best equipped to do that. We thought probably a physician, right? And or someone like a nurse practitioner. And here's why that's important. In order to live well with diabetes, I have to change how I eat. I have to take my blood sugar, right? I have to understand what my blood sugar is and take the right amount of insulin if I'm insulin-dependent diabetic, right? And all of those things have to happen on a daily basis. There are certain things that I have to do as certain types of tests several times a year, right? And if all of those things don't come together nicely, I'm going to be right back in the hospital, which is not the place that anyone really wants to be, as nice as hospital people can be, right? So what we decided to do is have the nurse practitioner, once the patient is stable, prior to being discharged, go to the hospital and do a couple of things. Let's just, without this being judgmental, find out how you got here. What didn't happen in that equation of things that should have happened, right? Let's just have that conversation, because I could guess all I want, and I could label you all I want. She's non-compliant, she didn't listen. But in fact, many of the stories we hear are about simply not understanding or not having the support to do what is needed, right? So the nurse practitioner's role is first to listen and understand, and then to work with that person in partnership to develop a plan that hopefully keeps them away from coming back to the hospital and being readmitted. Right? Because nobody likes being, they take a lot of blood work, you get poked and prodded, it's noisy, it's hard to sleep in there, right? All of those things. We want to not have that happen. So the nurse practitioners also act as a transition person, right? When you leave the hospital, we really want you to go back to that primary doctor of yours, right? So that they know you were in the hospital and that they might need to do a little bit more to get you on the right track. And we want someone who can have that conversation with your doctor about your medication level and those kinds of things. Very often, because the trust isn't there and that relationship isn't there, our members are, one, a little embarrassed that they got hospitalized, so they're not feeling empowered to have that conversation with their doctor. And if that conversation doesn't happen, that can also be a contributor to coming back. Right? So this piece about going to where people are, not just physically, so we're going to the hospital, but emotionally, right? Where they are in terms of what they're thinking and feeling is critically important to that whole sphere of health literacy so that we can help them along that journey. Making sense? Yep. All right, so we also recognize, so let's say we're going to stick with Ms. Jones as the story. So that was her acute phase, right? So now she's going back to the doctor. She had the nurse practitioner who helped to transition and keep things on track. And so now she's at home and she's trying to make those lifestyle changes. You know what might be helpful? Someone who's kind of like a coach, right? So we have care managers who can go meet that person at their home, right, or at our wellness center, they can call and they can have a conversation to help fill in the gap and reinforce information. But let's say now Ms. Jones is well on her way, but it would be helpful when she's trying to do things like remember about how often to exercise and walk more. We offer swimming classes, do all those kinds of things. If someone else were there just to kind of cheer her on. So we have people who are more like peers, right? Who are kind of that accountability coach, that support person. And we have a variety of names, like when people are in our wellness classes, they may get a coach that supports them. But this is someone who understands because they've had a similar lived experience. And so they may send me a text message to say, I'm going to the wellness class. Are you coming? They may say, I'm going to the swimming class. I didn't see you last week. Are you coming? Now we've given more of a longitudinal level of support so that Ms. Jones can maintain wellness. How many of you tried to lose weight? Right? Is it easy? No, because from time to time, life happens. The other day I had a particularly stressful day and I thought, you know what I need? A Cinnabon. You know? I mean, and luckily there was one in the house, right? But yeah, those things are like, well, they've got to be like 1,800 calories, you know what I mean? My favorite go-to stress thing, a vanilla milkshake, right? So this isn't about the haves and the have-nots. This is about what we do to cope and feel, and those things supersede how we are educated about what we do, right, for our health. So we just have to remember all of those kinds of things and create solutions that keep that in mind. So I mentioned we have a wellness center. We need to put things in the community, right? If I have to take buses and all kinds of things to get to that thing that you want me to do for wellness, it ain't gonna happen. You know, I'm gonna think about it, but it's not gonna happen, right? So we have a wellness center that's located in a place where we have if you mapped it out, where we have a good concentration of members. We are looking at opening a second wellness center because there's a whole nother group of members that are more in the northeast part of the city that are not likely, there's not like a barrier or something, but it's just not, it's like going from one neighborhood to a very different neighborhood from where they are. So we're going to be putting one in another neighborhood that's going to help to bring those people together. We are going more upstream. We have a partnership with an organization called DC Scores. They're in 45 district schools. Why is that important? We're not doing the same in schools like we used to around education. So they do around health education. So what they do is offer soccer and kind of a mental stimulation as well, which they do poetry slams, things like that, that help children to be engaged in how to speak and say what's on their mind and express themselves, right? Those are great resiliency builders, but it's also a way of getting them more active. What's wonderful about what they thought about too is that when they go to the schools, they try to recruit teachers to be the ones that they train as coaches. So we get this trusted environment. Do not underestimate how trust or lack thereof changes our ability to hear the information, right? And so our partnership with them, we bring the health component by having tables there where we're educating the children and their parents about health and wellness. And you know, an important point that we heard starting off is having an annual physical, right? It's ideal if you're going back to the same provider because that really helps to anchor where that person knows you, you know them, and you, again, build that trust. We have a program with another organization called Mama Toto. They do amazing work for women that are pregnant, particularly women who are having a high-risk pregnancy. What's important is they always come to the home. And when they come into the home, they are assessing and supporting. Again, judgment-free zone. So if you have a high-risk mom who has 2 children under the age of 5, it is very likely that she rarely sits down as much as she should. And when you're a high-risk pregnancy, one of the things you need to do several times a day is to get those feet up off the ground, right? Mama Toto will come in, they will do the dishes, they will watch the kids, they will do whatever is needed to kind of reduce that stress level, because a stress level that is increasing means your blood pressure is going up. All those things are working against that healthy pregnancy when you are already at risk, right? So what we're doing at AmeriHealth is finding these community partners. These are persons that are trusted. These are persons that are groups that understand the population with whom we are trying to engage. And they do a great job going to where people are to help them, support them over whatever time is needed to get to that point of wellness. And wellness is not just a destination, it's an ongoing practice every day, especially as we age, right? I saw that some of you didn't, you know, very few people sat down when I talked about over 25, right? So, you know, we have to be sure that we support people all along that continuum to be able to change and be well. A couple more things I want to talk about is in terms of this trusting relationship, we have a group that we do with another community-based organization that focuses on persons with metabolic syndrome, which is high cholesterol, diabetes, and hypertension. Unfortunately for us, a lot of our members have all three. We rarely see someone just with hypertension or just with diabetes. Human behavior tells us that after at least 6 weeks, we are more likely to be able to sustain change. So the program that they have is an 8-week class where people are learning in a group setting. The group setting ensures that there's that support and reinforcement. I'm not here alone. Everyone else in this room has very similar things that they're trying to work through. That's why Weight Watchers works. That's why 12-step programs work, right? Let's get bite-sized pieces of information together. Let's help each other, right, along this journey. And what we've learned as well is where we hold things matter. When we have things at a church, and it's not even the church that the members attend, there is automatically more of a sense of comfort, of trust, so that they can really hear and receive the information. So I mentioned that piece because as we think about these solutions, we've got to think more broadly and step out of necessarily what we've always done as ways to create change. The other thing I want to talk about is something that I'm more and more understanding needs to have a place in healthcare, and that is human-centered design. How many of you have heard of that? Yes? I've got a fan. All right. So what human-centered design asks us to do is first and foremost understand that the other person. I love that term, cultural humility, right? Because this means that the context of your life is not something I'm going to guess about. It's not something that I'm going to tell you what I already know, because I don't know. I'm going to first engage in dialogue without judgment, with tons of empathy, right? I'm going to put all my listening and openness skills in play so that I can understand you first. And I'm not going to jump to solutions. I'm not going to jump to telling you what to do. I'm going to erase should from my vocabulary and have a conversation that first tells me what is important to you. That is the absolute best place to start if we are trying to improve health literacy. Health literacy is not about telling you about you, right? It's about asking questions. It's about engaging and using that understanding with a ton of humility to help that person to get where they need to go. So tell me this, do you think it's more expensive to take that approach or for me to do, like I can do robocalls, you know, you get those, right? When people are working to be elected, you pick up your phone and all of a sudden it's, you know, playing this message to you. You know, postcards, we've got a ton of those. We've got a ton of educational material we can send out. Which do you think is more expensive? Which one? I said short run or long run. Ah, it was a trick question. Thank you, right? Where we should measure our impact is in the outcomes, right? So I could mail cards and do the robocalls and mail out very beautifully done packets, but if it makes no difference, then the cost is still there. When someone goes to the emergency room, it's about $600 just walking into the door. When they've been hospitalized, it's somewhere around $6,000, $7,000 before all the tests and everything else, right? And depending on the unit they're on, if Miss Jones ends up being so sick that she's in the ICU, it's a lot more, right? And then there's that human cost, right? What's occurring with her family while she's hospitalized, right? We don't know that, but that's another cost. So we really have to think about more broadly, how do we make this work, but starting with the human being. I had the great pleasure, George Washington University is our academic partner, and this past summer, we had 60 students that agreed to participate in a design thinking summer, right? And so for several weeks, they used the human-centered design approach to get to know and understand our members. They followed them around, they met with them in different places, used a process of inquiry to really understand. And they were amazed at what they learned, and then they used that information to come up with some ideas, things that we could try out. Two things to tell you. One is that this issue of trust rose to the top as why people don't hear the information that they're often given. I don't trust, what you're saying. I don't trust that you have my best interest at heart. I don't trust that you're going to follow up and be there on this journey that I have. The second thing is about what I've been talking about. We've got to make it easy, right? We've got to make it easy. Quick story. In the district, we have the second highest level of people covered. Who has the first? Massachusetts, right? Here in the city, we have the second highest amount of people covered. And you want to know what? We have some of the worst health outcomes. Because though people have a card that says you have insurance, it has not equaled them actually going and accessing care. So it gives you a sense of the work we need to do to help people to know and understand this system, help them to take the journey through the system, and we have to make it easy. We have to make it so that we understand them and come to where they are. It's not one size fits all, and we have to really think about and keep retooling and being relevant. So things like using text messaging, using videos, replacing some of our previous methods of sharing health information is really the key to what we have to get done. So thank you very much for your time and listening.
Good morning. I thank Congressman Clyburn, Dr. Rivers, and Ms. Downing for this invitation. It's an honor to be here. I would also like to recognize my pastor, the Reverend Nelson B. Rivers III, who traveled from Charleston, South Carolina today. Thank you. From the Charity Missionary Baptist Church, and he's also with the National Action Network. Today I would like to talk with you about a tale of two children. Parents' educational and income levels matter. Many of you may be familiar with Cornel West, the Reverend Cornel West's book, Race Matters. And today I would like to just spend a few minutes of time kind of summarizing and reiterating what other people have said, that in this U.S., which is not a post-racial U.S., race still matters, and unless we develop sustainable pipeline programs, we will continue to perpetuate the educational, income, and health inequalities that we currently see in the U.S. So I would like to start with a story. Of Andrew and Michael. Michael and Andrew were born in the same hospital on the same day. Michael's parents are both college educated. They have well-paying jobs and hired a nanny to take care of Michael while they worked in their biotechnology fields. When Michael was 3 years old, his parents enrolled him in the neighborhood Montessori school. By the time he entered kindergarten, he could already speak 2 languages fluently, English and Spanish. His parents took him to their national scientific conferences. He also listened to comments from some of the most brilliant minds in his parents' field when they invited their colleagues home for dinner. Not surprisingly, Michael also entered the biotechnology field after completing his Ivy League college degree and his technology-focused graduate program. He is now one of the youngest captains in the biotechnology industry. Michael is 32 years old and is in excellent health. Like his parents, he eats healthy foods and exercises almost every day. Now, let's talk about our other child, Andrew. Andrew's parents graduated from high school. They were among the first in their families to do so. Both parents worked long, hard hours. His mother worked as a hairdresser in a beauty salon, and his father worked as a construction worker. During Andrew's childhood, neither of his parents had employer-covered health insurance. Other than for his school-required physicals, he and his family basically went to see a doctor only if they were not feeling well. When he was very young, Andrew's grandmother took care of him each day. Andrew loved watching the afternoon soap operas or stories with his grandmother. When he started kindergarten, he could count to 10, and he knew the alphabet. Andrew excelled in school. When he was in his junior and senior years of high school, he was at the top of his class academically. However, he did not receive guidance on entering college and applying to different colleges and universities. And also, during his last year, his father was diagnosed with late-stage prostate cancer and died. After Andrew graduated from high school, he worked 2 jobs to help pay his family's mortgage and his father's hospital bills. He never went to college. Andrew is now 32 years old and is married with 3 children. He was recently diagnosed with hypertension and type 2 diabetes. Again, we do not live in a post-racial U.S., and we do not live in a post-educational or income U.S. America is the land of opportunity, but without sustained and sustainable efforts to enhance the diversity of our pipeline of students who receive education, we will perpetuate the caste system in America, where the group that you were born into is the group that you will stay in. And so I'd like to spend just a few minutes today talking about why it's important for us even to have this panel that we're having. Many of us already know this, but just to reiterate. So educational attainment is a leading social determinant of health. Disparities exist in opportunities for educational achievement, and effective strategies can successfully reduce these disparities. So what we've been talking about all morning is that there's a road, there's a path to academic success. There may be another highway going in the same direction. Some highways may be circuitous, as Dr. Britt Rios-Ellis pointed out, but they're all headed in the same direction. The problem that we face is that many of our students are taking the exit. They're exiting before they achieve academic success. This is a problem. In America, the land of opportunity, children with less educated parents are less likely to attain a college degree or beyond. So among parents who have less than a high school education, only 5.9% of their children earn college degrees. Parents who are high school graduates have 13.3% of their children earn college degrees. If a parent has a bachelor's degree, among parents with bachelor's degrees, 50% of their children earn college degrees. And among those with doctoral or professional degrees, 73% of their children earn college degrees. So this means that unless we intervene, we're just going to keep seeing the same patterns over and over again, generation after generation. This graph shows that in the U.S. overall, if you look to the far right, the U.S. overall only has 28% of the population that's college graduates. That's our entire country. And when you look within racial and ethnic group, you see some startling differences. Among non-Hispanic blacks, only 17% of the population has a college degree. Among Hispanics, 13%. Asians lead the way, with 50% of Asian Americans having college degrees. And among American Indians and Alaska Natives, only 13% have college degrees. And in non-Hispanic whites, it's 31%. So not only do we see racial and ethnic differences in the low rates of college degrees that are earned, we also see that the U.S., unless we push these educational programs, the U.S. is going to fall behind in academic achievement relative to other countries. So what we do for one segment of the population will benefit the entire U.S. It's going to increase our educational levels for the country as a whole. Wealthy people spend more on their children. They spend 7 times more on their children than low-income families for educational enrichment activities like books, magazines, trips, computers. They have the resources to do that. But we also can develop programs that can step in where the parents are not able and provide these educational enrichment opportunities. This graph, when you look in the purple bars, those are people who earn the most income in the U.S. And you can see that their height represents how much they spend on their children on educational enrichment from 1972 to 2006. And you can see there's been a steady increase in how much the wealthiest people are spending on educational enrichment activities for their children. When you look at the lowest levels of income in the U.S., shown in the gray bars, That's remained relatively flat from 1972 to 2006. This graph shows what happens. What that translates into is that high-income families dominate enrollment at America's selective colleges. So in this land of opportunity, what we see is that when we look at the most selective colleges, most of the students there are from high-income families. When we look at community college, second from the left, most of the students there are from low-income families. The issue is not whether people should go to community college or four-year college. Community colleges serve a vital role in many of our communities. The question is, how do we get students from community colleges to four-year academic institutions so they can graduate from college? All of these factors contribute to what was just alluded to, which is lack of diversity in our science, technology, engineering, and mathematics workforce. In the U.S., you can see that in STEM fields shown in the dark purple, non-Hispanic whites comprise 71% of the workers in STEM fields. Non-Hispanic blacks comprise only 6% of people in STEM fields. Asian Americans comprise 15%, and among three groups, American Indian and Alaskan Native, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders, or people with two or more race, they only represent 2% or less of all the people in STEM fields. And Hispanics only represent 7% of people in these fields. These represent our physicians, bioengineers, people in the biotechnology industry, scientists at academic institutions. We talked about patients going into healthcare systems and not seeing people who look like them. That affects also the research that we do. Yes, many of our recruiters for research projects may represent the populations they're recruiting, but what happens once that person is enrolled in a clinical trial? Almost every face they see is going to be white after that point. So in America, the land of opportunity, we know that children of high and low-income families are born with similar abilities but different opportunities. And the achievement gap between high and low-income students has increased. College graduation rates have increased sharply for wealthy students but have stagnated for low-income students. And high-income families dominate enrollment at America's most selective colleges. And racially and ethnically diverse, talented students are underrepresented in STEM fields. Why is this important? What's the value of a college degree? Well, when you look at what a college degree translates into in terms of income, unemployment, and poverty, we see that among those with a bachelor's degree or more, the median income is about $46,000. Among those with a two-year degree, remember that graph, most of our students are in community colleges, right? The median income is $30,000. And among high school graduates, the median income is $28,000. The unemployment rate for people with a bachelor's degree is only 4%. It's 8% for people with a two-year degree and 12% for people who are high school graduates. And when we look at those living in poverty, only 6% of people with a bachelor's degree are living in poverty. 15% of those with a two-year degree are living in poverty, and 22% of high school graduates are living in poverty. Our goal is to increase the diversity of college graduates. So we're talking about health. So what's the relationship between education and health? And Dr. Glover and others have already kind of alluded to this. Every additional year of schooling represents an 11% increase in income. And those higher earnings increase access to healthier food and safer homes and can lower stress. We know now that bioinflammatory stress is a leading contributor to many chronic diseases, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. And a lot of it comes from living in stressful environments, unsafe housing, lack of access to high-quality water, poor schools, people shooting at our children while they're trying to walk to school. Those are very stressful day-to-day environments. And just as an aside, you know, we talk about terrorism. Terrorism is not new in many of our communities. It's been going on for years. When we live in communities where our children are scared, afraid to walk to school because of the shootings, that's terrorism. That's domestic terrorism. And our children have been living with this. So when we look at high school graduates, We see that the lifetime earnings of high school graduates are $1 million. For people with a bachelor's degree, the lifetime earnings are $2 million. And people with a graduate degree, the lifetime earnings are $4 million. So having a 4-year college degree and beyond makes a difference. We know that people who have an additional 4 years of school have lower risk of diabetes, heart disease, being overweight, and smoking. This translates into living longer. So when we look at men shown in the green in the top, men who have a college degree live 7 years longer than men with a high school degree. 7 years. We might think, well, it's only 7 years. What difference does it make? Well, that's the difference between seeing your children graduate from college, getting married, having your grandchild. When we think about our own lives, that's a big difference, right? Women who are college graduates live 6 years longer than women who are high school graduates. And again, 6 years of life because of a college degree. So as Congressman Clyburn said, we're not here just to talk about gloom and doom. We have specific strategies that are in place that are providing solutions to these disparities. We know that pipeline intervention programs that provide educational enrichment activities for students work. They translate into higher rates of graduation from 4-year colleges and beyond. These programs work, and we thank Congressman Clyburn for his support of these programs. And I especially thank you because my office is actually in the bioengineering building in the Clyburn Research Complex at the Medical University of South Carolina. So thank you. So our cancer control suite is very diverse. We provide a lot of diversity there. So we know there's been a program that existed in the U.S. that assisted students with financial aid applications. All they did was provide people who helped high school students fill out the financial aid applications. Because what happens, the students get these applications, they take them home, often their parents aren't able to help them. So the students try to fill them out themselves. Well, then the schools they're applying to get these applications completed by the students, and they compare them with other students' applications. Who are they going to choose? I mean, some of them are not filled out all the way. So just providing people to help students fill out their financial aid application boosts college enrollment by 8%, and it only costs less than $100 per student. And we always talk about the prison industrial complex. This is way cheaper than keeping somebody in prison. Yeah. Less than $100 per student is a better investment. You get a better return on investment for society. Another program in the U.S. mailed personalized information on college options to high-achieving, low-income students. That boosted applications to colleges by more than 30%, and it only costs $6 per student. It's very cheap. At the Medical University of South Carolina Hollings Cancer Center, we have a number of pipeline initiatives. One of them is funded by the Department of Defense, and it's called a Collaborative Undergraduate HBU Student Summer Training Program. I'm happy to say we started with philanthropic funds, and we've been funded since 2007. This is in partnership with Claflin University, South Carolina State University, and Voorhees College. We have a 10-week program, and we bring students in. It funds 4 students to come into our institution. We have a curriculum that we've developed for them. We built in a graduate record exam course that from Kaplan or Princeton Review to come on campus. And we also have cultural enrichment activities, like we do etiquette training. We bring in someone to show students when you're at a fancy table setting, which knife and fork to use. Because a lot of times on these college interviews, the students are taken out to dinner. And that's part of the evaluation, knowing how to operate in situations like that.
Absolutely.
We also, I did want to point out, if you look at pages 58 and 59 in your books that you have, the 9th conference, it's the summary report. We thank Dr. Rivers and Dr. Sabra Slaughter for their support of our Student Research Forum, which we've been running since 2008. Every year, students from around the country submit abstracts, and they participate in our Student Research Forum. And Dr. Britt Rios-Ellis is on the planning committee as well. Last year, we had about 70 students who presented scientific research, and about 80 students altogether who participated. So we, again, are working on the pipeline. And you can see pictures of some of the students who won awards at the conference. Last fall, we received a grant from the National Cancer Institute that allows us now to fund 16 students per summer. And so we're providing training to students not only from the 3 HBCUs in South Carolina, but also the University of South Carolina. And this, the students in the program receive 15 credit hours for their summer research because they go to class and they also work in the laboratories. We've included 11 students on peer-reviewed publications that have come out of these programs. So by the time these students apply to college, many apply to graduate school, many of them already have peer-reviewed publications. And that gives them a competitive edge. And just recently, about 3 weeks ago, we were really excited to receive funding from the National Cancer Institute through their Continuing Umbrella of Research Experiences Award, or CURE, to partner with Burke High School in Charleston, South Carolina. It's a school that has historically served an African American and underserved community. And what's exciting about this partnership is that our faculty are going to the high school to teach classes at the high school, because we're trying to fit in the curriculum and in the day of the high school. And the students will also come to our institution to do research in the laboratories of our faculty, and they'll get paid to be there.
Oh, yeah.
So back to Michael and Andrew. What the story between Michael and Andrew shows, and basically what everyone's been saying on the panel, is that there is a positive link between parents' education and subsequent child achievement. Data from the panel study of income dynamics at the University of Michigan show the close connection between a father's income and educational level and how far his children can be expected to succeed. So you may ask, what about the mother? The mother's influence is important as well, but study after study has shown that it's really the father's educational level that seems to drive where the students go. And that's why we critically need these pipeline programs. We have also seen that the effects of socioeconomic stress in childhood are often felt throughout a child's life, through early adulthood. And Dr. David Williams, who's now at Harvard University, he used to be at the University of Michigan, has been arguing for years that when we assess health status, we can't just assess the current health, we have to assess the health that the person had in their childhood growing up. But together we know that we can make a difference. And so we know that the next decade, through these pipeline programs, can become the best of times for all Americans in terms of expanded opportunities for education. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ford. Thanks to the entire panel. We wanted to use about the last 12 minutes we have here for Q&A. Before I start the Q&A, let me thank a few other people. Now, you've heard Dr. Rivers mentioned over and over again. One or two people mentioned Melinda Dowling, but I want to thank her as well. But for her, none of this would be taking place, in spite of what David Rivers may say to the contrary. Thank Lloyd Moore, who is always on point with our efforts at environmental justice. I thank him so much. And Saber Slaughter, who is from the Medical University of South Carolina. David takes all the credit, but he does a lot of the work. I want to thank him as well. Let me add, something was said right at the end of Dr. Ford's comments that I've got a buddy that Dr. Rivers knows who is, I play golf with him a lot, Arnold Collins. I think y'all kind of course you were behind him, but he's a little older. Yeah. Arnold Collins told me a story one time. I was talking to him about the value of educating young people, getting an education early. And he told me he was in banking, and he had graduated from North Carolina A&T, and was called to, that was a problem for him, but I let him go. Was called up to New York to be interviewed for a job by a bank. And he, not knowing what was going on, was invited to dinner the night before his appointment the next morning. And he went to dinner with the folks that he was going to be interviewing with. He didn't know all these people were the people he was going to be interviewing with. And the next morning when he got to his interview, he was told that you can report to work at such and such a time without anything else being said. And he looked around and the guy said, you were interviewed last night at dinner. So you were interviewed last night at dinner. And he was told by one of the people who looked like him, was the moment he knew how to pick up the knife and fork and hold it correctly, they knew they had the kind of representative for their bank that they wanted. Education at all levels, very, very important. And I know, because I've got grandchildren, and I had a battle with my doctorate daughter who holds a terminal degree, but wasn't spending sufficient time, in my opinion, teaching table etiquette. That's very, very important. And so I think we have to think about education more broadly. I went to a 4-year institution. I got a liberal arts education. But you know, I went to a Job Corps training center one day to give a Black History Month speech. I had a pretty well-researched speech. There are a couple of things I don't know, but history is something that I know a good bit about. But on that day, they told me that they wanted me to take a tour of their facility. They wanted me to see what was going on in that facilities. And as we were taking the tour of the facility, I came upon a group of young people who were having a little discussion, more like an argument, about which one of them had chosen the vocation that was most important to society. One of them was being trained as an automobile mechanic, and he was talking about why he thought automobile mechanics was more important. Another one was being trained in the culinary arts, which I found out later meant cooking. And she was arguing as to why she thought cooking was most important. Another one was being trained as a plumber, and he was arguing about his vocation. So that day when I got to the auditorium, I took my little well-researched Black History Month speech and I folded it up and put it in my pocket, and I shared with them what I heard that day listening to those kids. And I said this to them. I said, now, I've got a 4-year degree from South Carolina State, 19 miles away. I was at the Job Corps Center over in Bamberg. I said, but if I wake up in the morning and turn my shower on and no water comes out, I'm not going to leave the doctor. I'm going to need a plumber. So I get in my automobile and start back to Columbia this afternoon, and something happens to my automobile, I ain't calling no lawyer. I'm calling an automobile mechanic. That's going to be the most important person to me at that particular juncture in my life. And education ain't just about going to a 4-year institution, though that's important. But when I was teaching school, I built my first house. I wish my teaching salary was that of the plumber that put those plumbing fixtures in my house, or the electrician that wired it. So let's think broadly, finding our young people where they are, taking them to where they need to be in order to be productive citizens. Now, you got a question.
Thank you so very much for this panel and for this very brief question and comment from Richard Moore of Environmental Justice Helplines and myself, Michelle Roberts. You asked where did we go with solutions. One of the things that we're doing across, and we want to share this with you, we need the support, we hope, of your medical institutions and the rights thereof, as you spoke to the issues of cumulative impacts. We're working very hard across this nation in local states and regions to make sure that we have cumulative impacts bills that are happening in our state localities. We will need you all to help support us on these things. As you know, the Clean Power Plan rule is up. We need to make sure that our folks are down in that Clean Power Plan rule. What do I mean by that? This same piece, cumulative impact, is not in the rule. So what we're pushing for is to have state-centered EJ analysis that focus to the point that we must have EJ cumulative impacts in that piece. In addition to that, we want to make sure that we're not shifting the burden. As we said, we're putting all these other stressors. We don't want that. So we're trying to figure out, Dr. David Rivers, we need your help with this, with bringing our medical folks together and everything, helping our environmental friends understand that we got some stressors that they need to make sure that are in their policies that they're advocating for, right? So we need that. And last, I'm proud to say that we are working with young people, especially in my home state of Wilmington, Delaware, where we are educating our children about what it means for green sciences. Thank you, darling, our dear sister back here, for helping us in New Mexico get the first ever wildlife refuge that is based on the Environmental Justice Framework. These are the solutions, Congressman. Thank you for this session, for allowing us, but we need all of you on this panel. We need all of you in this room with us as we push these pieces, because we can't do this without you. And last, thank you for supporting Regenesis in South Carolina. It gave me great pride and privilege to be with our dear brother Harold Mitchell, watching as he has now, it has 6 federally funded healthcare facilities, a mobile unit, and our babies are down there learning how to make human androids, to which they were Miss Little Perfect Red Bow learned to do sign language. This is what we are doing in our communities. This is because of our environmental justice movement. And all last, we want to give a shout out to the Johnson family for establishing Hazel Johnson EJ Way in Chicago yesterday. This is about solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Well, you're getting better. You didn't do but 3 last time. Go ahead.
My name is Ronald Day. I hail from Dillon, South Carolina. I have an organization called Positive Change Courtesy Cooperative, and we've been working with all of the solar companies doing business in the D&D market area. Through President Obama's Sunshine Initiative program, our federal government and state has spent $16.1 billion between now and 2020. Van Jones, CNN commentator, in 2007, got former President Bush to codify green jobs, which basically put this industry on steroids. I have put together a nationally syndicated radio show called Solar Now and Its Future and Its Economic Impact on Black America. I've written recently a letter to President Obama asking him to put $100 million into development of solar farms for our HBCU campuses and our black farmlands. How does this tie into the issue of health? Being that my mother went to Morris College in Sumter, South Carolina, was one of the first African Americans to get a degree from Columbia University, but she couldn't go to the University of South Carolina. Okay? I have been in Orangeburg, South Carolina, at Claflin College in 1969, right after the 68. Now, why do I bring this up? You're talking about education. One of the worst things that ever happened to black folks is the disintegration of our black high schools. Some of our schools, like Burke, Wilson, and Florence, remain, but the Gordon High School is built in South Carolina, which has turned out some of the brilliant minds in this country, and hundreds of small black high schools that existed were integrated existence in our state. And I've seen the decline of pairing of those teachers because I've been going back and working with students trying to get them scholarships at our HBCUs. Nothing I've been paid for, it's just something I've done because of my connection with my coach.
Sure.
I'd like to say thank you, Congressman, but we have to find a way for baby boomers to be able to get better health care for our elders who are still living in those small cities. My mother passed here in Washington, D.C. I had to go to South Carolina and bring her here in the hospital because she couldn't get this basic care that she needs to Florence, the closest city from Dillon that had certain medical services. And it's problematic. I had to drive to South Carolina for 23 months in a row to check on my health.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. You're quite welcome. Thank you. You had your hand up?
Questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Nicole Scott Harris. I'm organizing New Jersey for New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. I want to know, where is the CDC representatives and leadership in the environmental front more generally? I think there's a level of cognitive dissonance that's happening where there are pipelines and communities all over this country trying to make the case, communities without resources, corporations who are trying to bring these pipelines in their communities. And Louisiana was just like a border. So simultaneously, we have native tribes fighting pipelines and Louisiana underwater at the same time. And it's a serious level of cognitive dissonance. And for me, I'm 32, my generation, this is a serious level of urgency. And education is not going to matter, your income is not going to matter if you don't have a place to tackle this with this right now. So I just want to know, because I don't feel like for the CBC that there is somebody who I can point to that I can say is a true advocate for the environment.
Why don't you just use your finger and point right here?
Okay.
I am in the CBC.
So that's why I'm saying that. I haven't heard anybody here, any black representatives say anything related to pipelines on a broad scale using their platform to deal with that issue. And we're dealing with pipelines in New Jersey as well.
Well, are you following the debate in the Congress? I mean, the debate on pipelines in the Congress, one of the biggest issues in this campaign happens to be the fact that Hillary Clinton started losing votes because she supported Barack Obama, what was conceived to be Obama's position on the pipeline, which was opposed by the Congressional Black Caucus, which Hillary now opposes. That's been the big part of this campaign.
Well, what I mean is actually using your platform to take over the narrative and really shift the direction of the conversation. That's what I'm talking about. The same way that you guys had a sit-in not too long ago related to a particular issue, I think that you should be taking that same level of sense of urgency and passion and determination to make it so that people understand that it's not going to matter about anything about where you live, your zip codes, none of that stuff is going to matter. Ask the people on Staten Island. None of it is going to matter if we don't have a habitable place to live.
But let me assure you that we are. All I want you to do is turn off whatever you got turned on and go to C-SPAN and follow what we're doing in the Congress. The fact of the matter is, I am the congressional person doing Louisiana. I just met with the governor of Louisiana. I had dinner with him night before last, had a meeting with him last week, working on this issue. I'm now trying to get them $1.9 billion to fix the problems in Louisiana. Now, I don't have press conferences every day to tell people how I'm negotiating. What I do is get it done. which I did for Katrina. Because, ma'am, every member of the CBC can't do environment. I'm doing the environment. I got other members of CBC doing other things. I can't do what they do. All of us have roles to play. I'm going to do mine. Hopefully they will do it. In fact, one of the times I just walked out here was to talk to Marsha Fudge from the CBC. We all have roles to play. Turn off whatever you got turned on. Go to C-SPAN and follow us. That's what we do. Yes, sir.
That's a really great question you ask, and it's about raising awareness of, for example, the Dakota Access Pipeline and sort of the, they call them protectors, actually. They're not protesters. There's about 8,000 Native peoples in South Dakota right now protesting the North Dakota Access Pipeline. And we're doing a pretty good job in terms of social media, Facebook. You know, there used to be a joke, you know, in Indian country. They say, what does FBI mean? They used to say fry bread Indian, right? Now it's Facebook Indian. And so there's a connection between all of these Native peoples on Facebook sharing information, collecting the resources. You know, my level of support for the protesters is sharing gas money for folks that are heading up there. I mean, that's kind of the level of support that we're in, as well as sharing information, sending up 3 boxes of groceries for folks up there, and then asking ourselves, well, what are we going to do to support those folks when wintertime comes, because this is not going to go away. And so there's this organizing that's occurring within our tribal communities to support the folks on the ground up there, and then also sharing information at events like this about a very important issue. And you're right, something like, what is it, 35 million people would be impacted if this pipeline breaks and the contamination runs down, not only from the reservation at Standing Rock, but all the way down through, you know, all channels that that river, you know, connects. And so it's about sharing information. It's also about doing things like, you know, $50 for gas money for folks just to get to the next stop, and then connecting them with relatives that we know over in Denver, and then from there going forward. And so, you know, in addition to providing resources at the CDC and having very influential people on these panels, and then members of Congress sharing this information, it's really a coordinated effort, you know, that we're trying to undertake here. And then earlier from the conversation on, you know, education and its impact in tribal and also other communities, there's this, you know, kind of a very frustrating conversation that we encounter in tribal communities related to lateral oppression, where we're talking to each other in voices of, you know, frustration, marginalizing people who can participate, et cetera. You know, it really is a frustrating process. And what we try to do in understanding how to empower one another, it's really on how to speak with one another, you know, and understanding the value that we bring to the table, and then bringing, you know, these bridges of understanding from one and the other. So, I mean, that's just something I want to answer your question about.
And as I said, all of us have roles to play. But the fact of the matter is, President Obama was out of the country when the protectors started their protests. When he got back into the country, can y'all remember what the first thing he did? What is the first thing Obama did when he got back into the country?
Told to put all the federal agency permits on hold. Right.
Took all of them off. Put every federal permit for that pipeline, took them offline. I ain't heard anybody say, thank you, Obama. But that's what he did, because that was his role. We can't do that in the Congress. No, we can appropriate, we can do other stuff, but he could, by executive order, do what he did. And he did it. And the pipeline is now suspended for further study. Yeah.
I think it's also important to note the governor came in with the amount of money we wanted.
Absolutely.
And both the Obama administration and Congress have upped those dollars to make sure that Louisiana is taken care of. So Louisiana understands it, but Congress and the administration knows it's even a bigger problem than we're trying to do.
This is a worldwide.
And we, I might add, into the bill she's talking about, we added Texas for 2015, South Carolina for 2015, West Virginia, all wrapped in this bill. But these are not the things that you're going to have. You don't hold press conferences about these things. But if you turn into C-SPAN, you will see the discussion as they take place on the floor. You start having press conferences, and then you start waking up the dead. You say, Charleston's in my district. We got a saying down in Charleston, don't woke them, let them sleep. Gotcha.
Thank you for this workshop. My question is about policy. I've gotten an old man now, and I'll call it 19 now. I was sent off to a place to fight. I didn't know where it was on the map. I said to myself, if I ever get back and fight for my people, my life, really. And I've done that. Now that I'm an old man, I've done an assessment. I'm listening to you, I'm looking what I'm saying. I don't feel good in many aspects. So my question is, where are we going wrong? And since it's been a legislative session like that, what policies have we made that has caused where we are now? You know, the global environment. And I want to see how you're thinking, because all I know is what I have. Oh, thank you, sir. The question is, what policies have we done that we could have done a better job? None of us are perfect, but I think it will help us if we do some assessment right now. If we look at things, for example, like NAFTA, I think we've gone over, you know, was that a mistake? Just from your perspective, I just wonder where you all are. Thank you.
I don't think we've done anything wrong but one. And I want you, Dr. Glover said it right at the end of her talk. Let's go back to 1992, when I got elected, was when Bill Clinton got elected. He defeated a sitting president who was at 92% positive in the polls in the spring of the year. You go back and check, you will see that the first George Bush in February of 1992, favorability rating was 92%. Bill Clinton got elected, nobody else wanted to run, because you couldn't beat him. But in 1992, with a record turnout at the polls, Bill Clinton got elected, and the Congressional Black Caucus was increased by 60%. That's when I got elected. There were almost 20 of us, black people, got elected that year. Now, let's go to 1994. In 1994, the same number of African Americans, the number of votes that we lost, that the Republicans got in their loss, they got that same vote in 94. You go back and check, you will see there's no difference in the Republican turnout in 1992 and the Republican turnout in 1994. But we lost 56 seats. Why? Nobody showed up at the polls in 94. So we showed up again in 2008 and we elected Barack Obama. 2008. You go back and check, you will see that the Republican vote in 2008 was the same thing that it was in 2010. Yet we lost 50-something seats. And I was the majority whip. We had 4 African Americans who were chairmen of committees. All of them now, all of us, are backbenchers. Why? Because the people who showed up in 2008 did not bother to go back in 2010. Now, you all seen the polls out now, got Trump leading in Ohio, Trump leading in Florida.
Yeah.
Let me tell you why that is. When you do polling, you develop a model. You model the polling. So they have done a survey of the country, and they have decided that based upon their model, the turnout this year among African Americans will be what it was in 2004. They said, no, they ain't going to turn up like they did in 2012, because they were voting for Obama. They ain't going to turn up like they did in 2008, because they were voting for Obama. They're going to turn out this time like they did in 2004, when Bush defeated the Secretary of State, Kerry. That's what they're saying. So those models you see are based upon a 2004 turnout. Now, if you turn out like you did in 2008 or 12, then I don't have to worry about getting trumped. And I'm a pretty good business player. You know? I love bidding on Trump.
Could I follow? No? Okay.
I wanted to quickly respond here. You have executive order 12898 on environmental justice.
Which
and
one?
then you've the environmental justice executive order. Yes.
Okay.
And then there's also the executive order on tribal consultation 13175. And so from a policy level conversation, there's a really interesting development, not only several years back, but right now in terms of its implementation. And so when we see conversations on whether or not environmental justice requirements were pursued, communicating in a meaningful manner in languages that communities can understand on policy development and the implementation of various projects requiring the review of environmental justice policies or of tribal consultation policies, we see that the wheels move, they turn very slowly. The big issue that I find is that we don't understand the methodology behind the decisions being made when meaningful outreach is done or when communication is being made in languages that are understood in our communities. I think that is a very important component to understanding how those policies are being implemented. In New Mexico, working with Dr. Richard Moore, we've been able to pursue that in 2004, 5, and 6 with the environmental justice order at the state level. A lot of miles, a lot of work in multiple communities. I think the last count was like 32 communities that included Hispanic, African American, as well as tribal communities to develop that state policy that then presented the guidelines for whether or not environmental permits would be issued for polluters. Are we doing the best job we possibly can? No. Can we do a better job? Yeah. And it's a process where, like you, I sit back and think, man, this is really, really frustrating. Why can't we move faster, right? But then I'm reminded about, something that I came across not too long ago, especially reviewing this climate change data where we're kind of all doomed, right? I kind of thought, well, why are we doing this? Well, because we must. We have to. I don't know how we're going to stop this stuff. I don't know what tools we're going to use, but I got to try, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the process that I'm at right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Who's that? Oh, yes, ma'am. And then
Let me recognize my member. God bless you. Dr. Ford did a great job. This Jim made a point that reminded me last year after the Manual 9. A lot of folk want to have come by and let's hold hands and see if we can make this better. And a young brother said to me at one of those fake meetings, Reverend Rivers, what happened to the time when the black church led the movement and when the black church was so involved? And I get this narrative all the time, and what I said to him was, brother, you don't know because you're living in a fantasy world. And the problem with the fantasy is every time you try to go back to it, you never find it because it never existed. There never was a time that the black church totally was sold out on the movement, ever. Dr. King, Jim Clyburn has a great picture. I think it's that great. In the Chronicle, the last time Dr. King came to Charleston before he died was in '67 at County Hall. Right. A chair fell and they thought somebody fired a weapon and Jim and Reverend Philip were taking cover. But part of the problem was there weren't many churches in Charleston where Dr. King could come and speak. Now, come January, every one of those churches would talk about how great he was and all that stuff. This is the challenge. We live in a Kairos moment. The problem looking back, we always look back through false lens. A lot of stuff we're talking about never happened. What is not disputable, when the people who are living in the moment do what they should do, things happen. When they showed up at the pipeline, the president wouldn't have responded if the people hadn't been there. Absolutely. So come 2016, it won't matter whether Barack was the first black president if we don't do what we got to do November the 8th. And the challenge for us is we're always looking for somebody to blame as the short answer to a very complicated question. The reality is, to the extent that our community is engaged, that's the extent change has always happened. To the extent we're disengaged, that's to the extent that the oppressor succeeds. So while our frustration is palatable, we can feel it, the truth is, the largest black turnout in the history of the United States at the time was 2008. They said it would never be better than that, and in 2012 it exceeded it by 1%.
Absolutely.
If we do what we're supposed to do, I really have a problem with people not trying to deal with the democracy in a democracy. Doesn't matter what I think or feel. If I ain't got the votes, I got to either be able to stop the votes or get the votes. It's just that simple. A lot of our frustration is we won't accept the reality that people who vote on policy can be stopped one of two ways: replaced or supported. And we can't do it. So in this conversation, we have a chance. And my only frustration is that if we could figure out, Dr. Rivers, we're not cousins, but we've accepted it now. We can't. How we can connect the church in the community, because the system made a point where people feel comfortable when they come to a place where there's a level of comfort. But one of the challenges is a lot of the prophets, pastors, elders, apostles, and pastors and bishops are not comfortable. And to get them comfortable is a great challenge for us in the role that I fill with Reverend Sharpton as Vice President of Religious Affairs. So I'm not only pleased to be here and proud, although I'm very parochial about my member, but one of the frustrations you're going to face, there's a lot of skepticism because folk want instant results to things that will never be done instantly. I don't want to go back. Brother, I'm young, I don't want to go back to when Burt was my only high school. I don't want, because I've been back, and back ain't near as good as forward. And I ain't going back, because back is when I was a boy, nigger, and Sambo. I couldn't live where I live now. I couldn't walk where I walk now. I can't talk where I talk now. I had to come to Washington, D.C. on furlough. I am not going back, but we only got one moment. And the Kairos moment is now. And if we don't do it now, we have nobody to blame.
Well, let me thank all of you for being here. I think we have gone just about 22 minutes over the time allotted for this session, which means I'm not in this session I was supposed to be in at noon. Hopefully, I won't get dinged if I go there late. But thank you all so much. Look forward to next year.
So, Neil, can I get your number? So this is...
Yeah, really great. I really enjoyed the human-based design.
Yeah, she and I together.